Det är mycket snack också.
Hi and welcome back. This is Sound Talk, our little series of videos where we try to break down the recording process of audio, of vocal music and choir music that we have a lot of experience with. And it's a really nice thing for me, for us, I think, because we get to pick each other's brain on this topic that we all really care about. So this segment is about preparation. How do you prepare for your recording? And let's just dive in. Josef, you've been doing a lot of live recordings. How does your preparation usually look like? And what's your focus when you prepare for recording?
When it comes to live recordings with choirs or vocal groups and also bands, a lot of effort goes into finding the right location to me, because I don't have my own studio, and it depends on the group too. Sometimes it's a large choir or it's a small group. Sometimes you want to be close to the microphone, sometimes you want a lot of ambience, and also the budget plays in a little bit. I've been to schools, recording in schools, because they have a very acoustic treated environment. Kids scream a lot. I've been to churches, in apartments, and also studios, of course. When it comes to live recording, the time and day may play a very important role, because if there is someone cutting the grass, that could destroy a whole day. Also, when I'm in a church, I always call the janitor to find out where is the air conditioning system, how do I turn it off? It could start in the middle of a recording. It's always a bit tricky to turn it off, because different solutions.
Or a fridge in the room that you don't think about when recording, but then afterwards you hear this buzz somewhere.
I gated out so many fridges in my life.
I remember we treated the studio in Stockholm when I was in the group, and that's a different kind of preparation, I assume, even though you also have the metro sometimes below ground playing a little role in the recordings.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there are always challenges, and I think, I mean, when you mentioned the church recordings, Josef, I did a church recording a few years back, and they exactly at the same time as we were recording, they were actually building the new subway line under Stockholm. So there were enormous thunder blows, basically shaking the windows of the church. So we realized, okay, we're not going to record anything. So we just kept to rehearse. So I think a good piece of advice when you work in this environment, and have several recording sessions, because there might be unexpected issues. It can also be the fact that the choir doesn't sound that great. There might be a few people ill and or not in good shape. So it's actually very good to not put every hope for one single little recording. That's at least my experience. When it comes to studio recording, of course, it's a completely different story, because you have the possibility to do retakes, you do overdubs, many times you record one voice at a time. If the person has a bad day, you can meet next week again. You can rewrite the score in order to change your idea even. So the freedom is enormous. Compared to a live recording with a choir, of course. Also, this is a bit of the problem with the studio recording, because you can just keep on doing things and you never reach the finish line, because there's always something more you want to change or add. Most studio engineer would say that, what is your most important technical item in the studio? And most people would say that, well, it's the actual room. That is the most important thing in a studio environment, not the microphones or mixing consoles or plugins that people tend to have too much of a belief in today. But the room is essential. So we, as Morten said, we spend a lot of time trying to treat the room, actually treat it so we would have different sounds in different parts of the room. We also have several recording spaces in the actual studio. I remember when we recorded finger snaps, the best place to record the finger snaps was actually in the tiled bathroom, because you needed a terrible acoustics in there with a quick, fast, hard bang. But for finger snaps, it was the perfect space to record them, because a finger snap in a very dry environment is so boring.
It's nothing. Yeah.
It's nothing. It's like a little. So depending on what you're going to record, you need to think of the acoustics. And as many people think that, hey, I'm going to record some stuff at home, and I stick my head into the closet and put the mic there because there's no reverb in the closet. That is, it's a highly reverberant space, a closet. It's just the fact that, but the reverb comes almost at the same time as your voice, which means that you don't experience a reverb, but it actually comes just a few milliseconds later. And it's very, very loud. And this makes your mixing process really difficult, because it creates a lot of phase issues when you get exactly the same sound slightly later into the microphone. Don't go into the closet and record stuff. And if you have a room, don't be in the middle of the room if it's a small room, and don't be in the corners either. Try to keep your back closer to the wall, shooting out into the room, because then you actually will record less of the reverberation in the room. So there are a lot of tricks for home recording. Studio recording, I mean, my preference is a good studio environment where I actually many times record with the mic in Omni mode, because that's a luxury you cannot really afford if you record in poor acoustic spaces. But if you have a good room, Omni mode is fantastic, because you can. It's the way the most condenser mics work, cleanest and nicest, and you have the least issues when you try to mix later. No phase issues, no proximity effect, all these things. But they might not sound as cool as the same mic in cardioid. But don't be fooled by that, because that coolness you can work with in the mix later if you want to. So that's my recommendations in many cases.
Yeah, and I just have something to add. I mean, I guess the closet, I don't know if we should call it a myth or what, but the fact that you usually have a lot of clothes, you have a lot of mass that can absorb sound and reflection. That is a good thing. You have a duvet, you have pillows, you can hang it on your closet, like that kind of thing still works if you're talking about absorbing unwanted reverberation. That is, of course, a better thing than having that thing and having to maybe remove it afterwards. I did quite the opposite in extreme. I mean, to have during pandemic, I had a choir record with their phones, basically, because they are made for the sound that you produce very close to it. So there is actually a decent sound in those phones, at least now. And I was really surprised about how this expanding and compression works in those microphones. You get a really clear signal. So I mean, you don't have again, if you have the right tool for the right job, then it doesn't have to be the most expensive option.
And still you need to stay away from the refrigerator or the other sound sources, because they will definitely go into your iPhone mic as well.
Definitely.
Morten, what is your main preparations?
I think it would usually be to make sure that I'm going in as well prepared with the composition as possible. Like looking at the score, maybe I'm used to an acoustic sound, maybe I've been rehearsing it with a choir or a vocal group, and to tell myself that I'm not only documenting what I already know. Like I'm actually trying to translate this into two speakers, at least for now. That this, of course, immersive experience that you have when Anders, you talked about standing in the middle of a group. You cannot create that with 2 sound sources. So you have to understand how do you attack this problem in a way. How do you create depth? Do you have to change vowels? I talked a little bit about this before as well. You can do yourself a lot of favors that will help you when you stand in the recording process. And also dynamically, is it like, how do I want the whole track to work? Like this climax, maybe I cannot do it with volume. How should I do it then? Is it with timbre? Is it with energy? Like how much can I squeeze out of the singers? So you get the same sensation, but you have to translate it into this new medium, which is not a church or a concert hall. I think that's where you can save a lot of time and work, and you're just well prepared when you go into the recording session.
And I also think you're mentioning things about also adjusting the way people sing. It's also important. I mean, if you rehearse in a certain space and all of a sudden you end up in a studio environment and try to capture perhaps each singer one by one. For example, bassists who are used to sing acoustically, they tend to have a sound that is more, that projects better in a live situation, while it might sound a bit too, pointy and harsh when you try to record it, and you need to ask them to, hey, we need to cool you down a bit because you don't have to sing that loud or that with as much nose, perhaps. So there are things that perhaps should not be done at the recording moment, because if you have your bass singer there and he has never tried this before, he will be insecure and you won't get a good bass take. So he needs to get a chance to get into the music feel even before you start recording him, which is, I would say one of the main things that you need to deal with when you record is actually that the singer behind the mic is pretty nervous many times, or they, if they are, they know their stuff, but they are playing it safe, so they don't want to gamble anything. They're just basically delivering the notes in the right place, and you get a pretty bland result. You need to create a situation where the singer feels free and dares to take artistic risks and emotional risks in order to bring out things that are more interesting. So that's also part of the preparation to build a situation of trust between you and the performer as a sound engineer. But I also agree with you, Morten, with knowing the score, knowing what do you want to say with the music. What is the most important thing here? How will that, like, for example, when I do my recordings, I always try to record a very, very good lead, if I have a lead vocal, before I do anything else. And when everybody who does overdubs on that, the bass parts, backup vocals, pads, strings, brass, whatever they do, they need to have the lead vocals pretty loud in their ears to know that this is what I'm backing up. This is the most interesting thing in the whole mix. I'm not the most interesting thing. The lead singer is. And if you keep your eyes and ears on that person and that expression, you many times automatically get a very good, balance in the mix, because the singer is adjusting to something that they want to hear. Of course, it's not that cool for a lead singer to start out just with an empty track around, just perhaps with a click or so. It's not very inspiring. So they might want to redo it later, which they can, as long as the first take has all the energy, emotional stuff, and everything that you want in the final take. It needs to be there, definitely.
You can also prepare. I remember we did that a few times as well, like rubato cue tracks. So you actually record your live version with all the elasticity and fermatas and accelerando that you want to be there, and dynamics and all the liveliness that you aim for, and then you use that as a cue track when you individually add your part afterwards.
Yeah, like a live click, basically. It's very difficult to program a good rubato. I mean, a song where tempo constantly shifts. To try to MIDI map it, tempo map it, is very, very difficult, in my opinion. So what Morten says is that what we did with the regroup, but we actually stood behind 5 microphones, but very, very close to each other. So there was quite a bit of bleed between the microphones, but we could look each other in the eyes. We didn't have any monitors, no headphones. It was purely an acoustical situation, acoustic. So we could just record it freely, exactly when we could see each other's faces, how our mouths were moving, so we could exactly copy diphthongs and stuff like that. And after that, we could find out, okay, take number 3 is the best one. Let's use that. And then we edited it and made sure that the pitch was fine and timing, whatever things, corrected it. And then we went in and re-recorded each part separately, along with the guide track, the live guide track. So, I mean, just to be clear, what we were doing, and then you actually keep so much of the nice organic feel of the track that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Exactly.
I remember we did, was Nature Bar, right? We did that. One of the first recordings you did with the group also, I think. I mean, it's difficult even to program, if you want to tempo map something, to do a nice ritardando at the end of the song. Even that is actually, sometimes I just turn off the click there, and then the ritardando comes natural to the singer, or the length of the note ends where it should end, But that's, I mean, it's a bit up to each person what you want to do.
Yeah, sometimes you can have an issue with bleed, that the click track is going into the microphone.
In my experience, I think many times people have just and if you have overdub after overdub and everybody has that particular sound, it will get louder and louder. And then you add a compressor and you do EQ and stuff, and it gets even louder. So especially in breaks, when I do click tracks, I also dynamically change them. So if there's a softer part of the song, I use automation to have very soft click, hardly audible if there's a soft part of the song. And when it gets louder, I have a louder click. So you don't forget to have, so you sort of have the click on the same level. So don't use the built-in metronome in your audio program. Make a separate click track, and also try to have some more information than just the pulse. So if you have, rather than a little groovy pattern, perhaps, that helps the singers get into the right feel rather than just a thing. I think I know that. I mean, if you have a really, really good drummer, they're happy with just the metronome and they can play super groovy anyhow. But that's quite rare, actually. If you go to most singers I know, they want something a bit more groovy to relate to when they record, not just a simple metronome.
When recording choirs, if you are like 30 or 40 singers, you might not be able to have headphones for everyone. So you cannot use a click track in most cases. So it's depending on the choir conductor to either have a click track or just being constant with a tempo. So a preparation when working with a choir recording is to look at the score. Where can we make a pause? After this phrase or this part, we can make a pause and then take the tuning fork. Is it okay? Yes, then we can move on. To look at where are these like natural editing points that we could check. I also make a plan for what takes we will do. So first we sing through the whole score. Second time, like singing through but carefully, and then taking these parts that I wrote down, that the editing parts, so that we can make them super good, because you need this like organic feel for the whole perspective first, and then you can go down to the different parts, and then it's very important that they match with pitch and tempo and stuff. So and maybe we can talk a bit more about that in the recording chapter of this series. But I also want to mention that one trick that I learned from a really good sound engineer is that you can. I tried this once. We recorded Bohemian Rhapsody, and then the choir needed a click track or something to record to, because there was a band recording first that they would sing to, but we couldn't have headphones at least. So we recorded twice with speakers, so the choir could sing to the band recording once, and then nobody move, don't touch any microphones or speakers. Now we do it again. Then I turn the face on the second recording, and then the band disappeared almost. It was like a little bit of artifacts from the reverb in the room, but it was okay. So it was almost only the information with the choir, and then I could mix in the band, and it worked really well. So you can get away without headphones, but that needed a lot of preparation.
Yeah, and the same thing in studio. You can actually record one take with the singer in front of the mic, standing without singing, and then phase shift that bleed. But that means that it has to be exactly the same distance from the mic, and you cannot have any EQ, and there's a lot of things. But as a safety precaution thing, you can do that. But it's a lot of work right there.
Yeah. I think you also touch on an important factor, Josef, that when you, especially with bigger choirs and bigger groups, like to have a timetable that is realistic and that contains buffers, that is not stressing anyone. So that whole preparation, everything you can control, like when do we drink coffee? When do we have a bit of fresh air? When do we eat? Stuff like that. So everyone feels that their needs are taken care of. And also practically to have extra cables, extra microphones, backup solutions, speaking from experience.
Yeah.
And ask people to help you in the recording session. Maybe they don't have the knowledge of handling the gear, but maybe they can help you to run with the cables. And I mean, that could be anyone. There's so much time on a recording session, especially if you're in like a big church, just running around with cables, and I mean, it's kilometers of walking. And if you are recording video and audio at the same time, have someone pushing the recording button on the video or something, because you will forget. Or
one other part of the preparation is, of course, the technical aspect of it. What kind of microphones you choose, what kind of settings you have in your preamps, where you place the microphones, where in the room are we going to be, and so on. And I mean, that's quite a big topic, I would say. Many people tend to think that I should use as expensive stuff as possible all the time, and then I will get an expensive sounding recording. And I think that's a misconception. One, example is if you're doing high-end vocal percussion stuff, for example. If you do that in an expensive condenser microphone, it becomes thin, and how would I put it? It feels like it's difficult to treat it in a correct way afterwards. While if you take a much cheaper dynamic microphone and stay pretty close to it, you automatically get a sound that is closer to what you want. It sits in the middle, in the mix, much better than an expensive microphone. That's why when people record electric guitars, they usually put the SM57, a very inexpensive short microphone, right next to the speaker, which is, absolutely fine. So perhaps you should just try different microphones, different settings, different preamp settings, and use your ears and see if not is this sound nice, but will this sound work in the context afterwards? Will this sort of fit into a soundscape that you want to create? Everything in your mix cannot be equally important. That's something you need to remember. So it's actually the opposite. There's only a few things that can be very important in your mix. The rest needs to be backing up what is important. So I would say that I sometimes, if I have a mic with a lot of character, I can put the lead singer in front of it. But I don't put all the backup vocals, all the singers behind the same microphone, because then I need to turn off a lot of the interesting, frequencies when I mix, which, I rather take a microphone that has a different attitude then.
So it's also about like knowing what you have available.
Yeah, and if it's a singer who wants to deliver a very soft, intimate jazz ballad, you want the person to be very close to the microphone. So you need to prepare with a good pop shield, and then perhaps if you have other people backing up but not being as important, you should record them a bit further away from the microphone already, giving them a little different character. Which automatically would put them a little behind the lead singer in the mix. So try to think of your mix, how you want to mix already when you start doing the recordings. You need to know sort of where am I going to end up.
Yeah.
Listen to references as well, other groups or choirs and...
I have a question now. It's maybe in the anecdote category, but Anders, you're talking about expensive and inexpensive mics. I remember this story about you being at the Swedish radio and suddenly finding 5 U47s, which for like Neumann mics that are really, really expensive and really, really good. Can you just like how did that happen?
Well, that's an interesting story. We recorded early in our career. We recorded a jazz album live at the Swedish broadcasting system, and they had just recently found I think it was actually more than 5 microphones. There was like 15, 20 microphones that were unopened. They were in their original boxes that had never been opened since like the 1960s. And they actually had a serial number right next to each other, So we were the first ones to use these microphones when we did a recording. That was, an amazing thing. Of course, it sounded absolutely fantastic and were priceless, of course. And I think that's one of the few things that actually still has a value from when I started out as a recording engineer. I should have kept some of the microphones. All the other gear basically is not worth that much any longer. But like the very first sampler I had, it was an emulator too. I was the only one in Sweden who had one. And it could record 17.5 seconds in mono. And you saved it on a floppy disk that was, about this size. So we're all pretty happy.
And you kept that. And not the mics.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, we're happy that development has changed, and that probably people would buy that sampler though, because it looks like a tank basically.
I think we're reaching the end of this little segment, and after, like in this series, now you will get. We had a talk earlier about different tips and like specific things that we also mentioned here, maybe. But don't forget to think about these things. And it's Anders, you have a long list of things, and I think we add a few things as well to that. But that will be the next episode. So see you there.
Det är mycket snack också.